Friday the 25th of April, 1986. A beautiful spring day for the 43,000 inhabitants of Pripyat in the Ukraine. 3 kilometers from the city, the Vladimir Ilyich Lenin nuclear power plant, where several thousand people go to work each day. Tonight, the 176 employees of Block 4 have been ordered to carry out a test on a self-fueling system of the reactor, something that could save energy. At 1:23 a.m., the security systems are deactivated and the experiment begins.
However, the experiment did not go according to plan.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died.
Could the meltdown at Chernobyl have been prevented? Chernobyl was designed and built during the 1970s and the 1980s. Located in northern Ukraine, close to the border of Belarus. About 2 miles from Chernobyl was the town of Pripyat. Pripyat had a population of roughly 49,000 people. A town very much like our own. It was the home to the plant workers and their families. Within close proximity to us is the Limerick power plant, run by Exelon. Limerick is monitored closely by the NRC under very strict regulations, along with the other power plants in the United States. These strict regulations have been put in place and adjusted when needed to ensure our safety due to past nuclear accidents such as Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and the most recent being Fukushima. This is a photo of 3 Mile Island, where just like Limerick and Fukushima, you can see there are massive concrete buildings that cover the reactors to contain any radiation in the case of a meltdown. 2 of the many flaws surrounding Chernobyl are the lack of any concrete buildings around the reactors and the lack of government authority to put operational regulations in place, along with safety regulations in the event a meltdown should occur. And this is why.
The floor of the plant begins to tremble. The 1,200-ton cover of the reactor suddenly blasts into the air. An ultra-powerful stream of radioactive vapor releases uranium and graphite over hundreds of meters around the plant. From the gaping hole, a spray of fire charged with radioactive particles in fusion shoots 1,000 meters into the sky.
Had there been proper containment around the reactor, any type of accident involving it, whether it be an explosion or a meltdown, would have resulted in little to no radiation escaping. And the degree of damage done would not have been as devastating to not only the location, but to the lives of thousands as well.
At the core of the blown-out reactor, and buried under 14 meters of rubble, the graphite surrounding the nuclear fuel burns and melts the uranium. The radioactive fallout is going to be 100 times greater than the combined power of the 2 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nobody was prepared for such a crisis. For the next 7 months, 500,000 men will wage hand-to-hand combat with an invisible enemy. A ruthless battle that has gone unsung, which claimed thousands of unnamed and now almost forgotten heroes. Yet, it is thanks to these men that the worst was avoided. A second explosion, 10 times more powerful than Hiroshima, which would have wiped out half of Europe. This was kept secret for 20 years by the Soviets and the West alike. Many of these images have never been seen before. They were taken by journalists who were also exposed to nuclear contamination, some of whom later died. Those images tell the story of a hidden war, whose consequences continue 20 years later to worsen the toll of the disaster.
28 firemen lost their lives to the radioactivity they encountered while putting out the fire in the reactor 4, along with hundreds of the men who went in to decontaminate. Almost 40 hours since the accident, evacuation of Pripyat has finally begun.
The authorities conceal the seriousness of the situation. Inhabitants are given 2 hours to gather their belongings and assemble in front of their buildings. In 3.5 hours, 43,000 people are evacuated. They have been exposed to doses of radiation that may alter the composition of their blood and engender fatal cancers.
The enemy is never more unnerving than when he's invisible. K.J. Parker.
An entire culture ripped from its land. A world wiped out in a few days' time by an invisible enemy.
It was worse than a war. Here you couldn't see the enemy. In a war, you see the cannons, the machine guns, the tanks. Here, you see nothing. The radiation is everywhere. It goes right through you. It gets into you, and you only start feeling the effects later, sometimes years later.
The inhabitants of Pripyat are at high risk for long-term side effects from high-level radiation exposure, but they will not appear for months or even years later. When the time came and the side effects of the radiation did appear, the children and the women who were pregnant while living in Pripyat at the time of the accident seemed to be affected the most. They experienced effects such as birth defects with their newborns and growth deformities in their children.
Down by the water, the riverbed, somebody calls you, somebody says, swim with the current and float away. Down by the river every day.
As for the young men who remained in Chernobyl to decontaminate and control the situation at hand, they will experience the gruesome side effects of radiation sickness in just a matter of hours.
The initial symptoms of radiation sickness, vomiting, nausea and diarrhea, are followed by a latency period. It's only later that much more fatal symptoms appear, such as deterioration of bone marrow and horrible burns that eat flesh down to the bone.
The soldiers who were affected the worst were the ones in the helicopters. They would throw sandbags into the radioactive abyss of Reactor 4 to put out the fire. Each one of them would fly over the reactor more than 30 times a day, and each time they did, lethal amounts of radiation would contaminate their bloodstream.
During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die.
Over the next few months, a temporary tomb called a sarcophagus is built to cover Reactor 4. This will keep the radiation from leaking out any more than it already has. The construction started in June of 1986 and was finished by late November that same year.
There is a house built out of stone.
Families once called this home.
Walls and windows set.
Children once went to school here.
Tables and chairs warmed by all.
They played outside and slept soundly at night.
I don't feel alone.
But now only nature remains in the town of Pripyat.
This is a place.
Over the years, the radiation levels have slowly decreased, and as of 2011, the town was declared safe enough for tourism.